Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Became Fem Kyubi Part 3. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
A brush swung up the canvas. It drew back for a moment, then slid over it again in the opposite direction. It was pulled away once more, then another dip, and it flowed once more. This went on for a few moments. It was eventually just left in the ink pot. The man exhaled deeply. His job had recently become increasingly frustrating. There was so much going on that he didn't know how, let alone want to, handle it. He forced his creaking bones and aching muscles to cooperate. The Uchiha situation was not going well. His advisors were causing problems behind his back, nothing too outrageous, but enough to irritate him. His rogue students were still causing havoc, though Jiraiya was at least providing information to help alleviate some of the tension. But his main concern was anything but straightforward. Hiruzen sat down at his desk after finishing his painting. He selected an intriguing image from its face-down position. It wasn't as perfect as he had heard the first instance to be, but it was still an image that warmed his heart. He could still feel his Anbu shiver whenever she came into his office to report recently. Her initial reluctance to report was understandable. However, his gaze was drawn to the alien creatures depicted in the image. He couldn't put them together. He'd never heard of it before, but it wasn't too strange. There are many creatures in this world that he hasn't even heard of, let alone seen. But that wasn't what frightened him. His instincts were triggered the moment they appeared in front of the Uzumaki child. He still regretted revealing her fox connection. It could have been avoided, but he had granted the fourth's wish, although this could have been misinterpreted by those who were aware of it rather than the entire village. Knowing about her had unintentionally protected her from both the clans and Danzo, but it also put her in a position where he couldn't do much for her, at least not without serious consequences. He sighed yet again. His attention was drawn once more to the two vulpine creatures. Unusual, untrained but capable of traversing chakra, non-aggressive, and only appears to children. Aside from Narumi's lone Anbu guard, rumors of them began circulating a few months after the Senju clan grounds began to change. Were they the result of this, or is it a contributing factor? Was there a link at all? He had almost forgotten about the presence until the forest reappeared. It was now a constant in the village, present day and night, slightly comforting, as if wrapping people in a thin blanket. He had an odd feeling that these two had something to do with it, but pushed the thought away. They were distinct, and Nico reported that they felt strong but weren't releasing the waves of chakra required to cause such a constance within the village. He had sent several patrols to find these creatures on several occasions, especially since Nico had confirmed their existence. But, once again, there were no sightings of the creatures. They were able to elude even his best trackers. Their scent permeated the entire forest and seemed to stick together for some strange reason, confusing any trails. The Aburame almost never go near the forest anymore because their Kakechu refuse to return to their hosts. The Hyuga simply don't care, and those under his command failed to produce results. Either they were skilled sensors or masters of remaining unnoticed. If they could use chakra, as Nico reported, they could use both. Hearing that untrained animals could walk up trees was almost unbelievable. It takes training just to use chakra, let alone know how to use it. They were either trained or had exceptional instincts. Hiruzen had only heard of people entering or exiting the forest when children became curious or adults went in search of the rumored creatures. Even after he had his Anbu investigate those who repeatedly entered the grounds, not a single person appeared to have any connection. He could have them arrested, but the growing interest faded quickly when the area became too dangerous for civilians to navigate. Children continued to try, and a few claimed to have found the foxes. But the fact that Narumi came across them, especially when they came to her, was suspicious at best. Despite this, no evidence of any hidden plots or potential dangers emerged. The foxes have all but proven that they are not malicious. He just wished Narumi's guard wasn't the only one under his command who could find the creatures. In many ways, having Nico capture the creatures in front of Narumi would be counterproductive. He'd had a second guard for that purpose a few days before, but neither fox had shown up, leaving Narumi depressed. That was not going to happen again. Hiruzen set the picture down, giving it one last look. It was priceless. Narumi lay in the flower field near the waterfall, just as he had described, with two small inversely colored blonde and red foxes cuddling up against her. The smile on her face was there, but nowhere near as angelic as he had been told. Narumi's second visit to the area had been of her own volition, and was a near duplicate of the first, but it had taken the enamored girl several times longer to find the waterfall, leaving her exhausted rather than simply tired. The differences were obvious, and he wished he could see her for the first time, but he was content with this version. His reminiscence came to an end when he heard the door open. It was the reason he finished his painting and set it down. Jiji, Naru-chan, it's been a while since your last visit. How have you been lately? He asked as the girl ran around the desk to hug him. It's great. I even made new friends. She smiled as she let go of him. Oh, this is a first. Who could it be? The elderly man looked at her, puzzled, almost wondering why she was blinking. I don't know what their names are. That's odd. Friends usually have a name, Hiruzen said, almost laughing as he asked his question. I can't. They can't talk. Narumi grumbled. I see. Well, there's usually other ways you can ask or for them to tell. Hiruzen suppressed his laughter as he watched her pout deepen. But they're cats. How do I ask a cat what its name is? I'm curious. The old man laughed. He wanted to correct her but couldn't muster the courage. It wouldn't simply reveal her guard, but it was too cute. Her naive belief that she might be able to ask an animal its name was also amusing. Nonetheless, he was aware that some animals were intelligent and capable of doing so. He'd also like to know if they were capable. Did you try just asking? If they can't give you a name, or if they don't have one, you can name them yourself. Maybe I'll meet them someday. Narumi's eyes widened at the thought. Alright, Jiji. I just wanted to let you know that the academy starts next week, and I thought you'd like to meet some kids your age, maybe even make some friends. It's also where the Yondaime learned to be a ninja. Really, friends? I can learn like Yondaime. I love hearing about him. Can you tell me another story, please? Hiruzen chuckled at her restless probing once more. When he started talking about ninja, she would keep asking questions for hours. He was just glad it was mostly about the fourth Hokage, though he wished she'd asked about his own stories. Well, let's start with. Haruna huffed as she placed a pot of water on the fire to heat, then moved the stool over to the chopping board and began slicing vegetables. She was having a good time watching and preparing her favorite food. Jai-san had stated that she was almost ready to begin assisting in the production, and that she was focusing on all of the necessary aspects. Haruna had already begun, so she was falling behind, though that could have been due to her recent rushing, causing an imbalance in the meal. In essence, her haste had reduced her from being better than her sister to being worse. Despite the fact that they were both informed at nearly the same time, a single day apart, she had been informed first, and her failure had been communicated to her sister, preventing her from repeating the same error. The violet-eyed girl sighed at the prospect of learning to make and possibly creating ramen. Even though she didn't need to eat, it was still enjoyable. It didn't matter if it included bathroom needs, the experience was too delicious to pass up. But she hadn't had a bowl in a long time. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of her sensei. Our distinguished visitor has arrived. Widened eyes flew off to speed up the process. She had been dozing off. It was far too early for that, especially with a sister to feed. Her hands flew back and forth as she fished out the remaining ingredients and prepared them for Tuchai to use. She needed more after the first bowl. Her tiny feet carried her across the room and back, and a third, fourth, and fifth bowls worth of ingredients were quickly sliced, diced, heated, and prepared. It was too difficult to prepare enough for a single bowl at a time, so ingredients were usually laid out for several. Haruna rushed the last bit, dumbly, after hearing Sensei call out order up from outside. She watched as Tuchai returned to the kitchen, but as the door closed behind him, she noticed a pair of eyes leaning over to the side, trying to peer through the small gap. Both feminine sets widened as they locked onto one another, unknowingly mirrored by the other, just before being cut off. Violet's slitted eyes were fixed on the now closed door. She had been leaning too far over the table, chopping the last of the vegetables required for Tuchai's healthy diet. Usually, she just cut the produce calmly, leaving nothing visible through the door, regardless of who looked in. It was shocking to have someone see her, especially when it was her sister. She noticed me. My ears, too. But let's hope she doesn't. She certainly will. She represents us. She will, of course. Tuchai. Haruna inhaled deeply. Tuchai Jason. He didn't respond, but the turn of his head indicated he was paying attention. Ni-chan just saw my ears, the man said, pausing for a moment before nodding understandingly. He was aware that the twins did not want to be outed just yet. As the man walked out with 2 more bowls for his usual early morning customer, the girl sighed. Narumi's gaze was drawn to the open door. She had just pulled herself out of the gaping trance, but she was still in shock. As she witnessed what she had done, were those genuine? And those violet slitted eyes, they were so very similar. And look at that hair. She would have thought it was the fox if she hadn't seen the human face. Her attention was drawn back to the bowls of food as she watched the door open. She was hungry, but not nearly as much as she had been in recent weeks. It wasn't the starving pang that had plagued her for so long, She could pause for a moment. Narumi raised her head from the steaming bowl of divine odors. She came to a halt with a blink as the old man put his finger to his lips. It was the first time she'd seen such a gesture, but she recognized what it meant and frowned. Boo. He shook his head this time. Don't worry, you'll run into each other eventually. The girl returned to the nearly impossible to ignore bowl of angelic deliciousness, now visibly pouting. Her desires were quickly fulfilled by the twin sticks of deliverance held within her grasp, as she was unable to resist any longer. Her thoughts were still on the impossibility. The twins were relaxing on their day off when they noticed a spark of lonely darkness approaching them. Twin slits turned towards each other before nodding. Their gazes lifted from the flowers. They dashed towards the usual field, only to belatedly notice a second spark of darkness following the first from high in the trees. It took them a few days to figure out why the ramen maker had warned them not to appear in front of their sister, but once they did, they agreed that they would not do so in human form. At least not until the follower was gone. Neither of them knew when that would be. The twins emerged from their den, made specifically by the waterfall for ease and closeness, through a flower bush planted against the rock wall, and into the usual field. They moved towards the center and then lay down, as if they were always there. It took a few more minutes for the slow human sister to appear. Her smile brightened as she dashed over to them, almost squealing as she snatched them into a hug, much to their chagrin. You've returned. Being held so roughly was not pleasant, but they persevered. It was a happy action, so they wouldn't have to fight. They were both irritated until one was laid back down and the other was held in a far more comfortable position. It was convenient that they were small enough to fit easily within a child's arms. As Narumi sat, the red fox walked onto her lap. Soon, the blonde fox was purring in Narumi's arms, her head gently and lovingly stroked. The one beneath quickly mirrored the sensation she was getting from her sister, both physically and mentally. They were able to feel the other person's emotions through the link, which influenced their own. Amen. I'll be starting the academy tomorrow. Despite barely paying attention, this quickly drew their attention, jolting the two out of their pleasant trance. They exchanged dark glances. Gigi says I might make some friends. I've never had one of those. Titabane, Narumi said wistfully. However, I'd like to think of the two of you as my friends, she said, her smile returning only to widen when she felt their nods. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They agreed to be friends even if they weren't human. The twins' thoughts were a little darker. She's not going to make any friends. She'll give it a shot. Hopefully, the pink-haired girl won't run over her. I can still feel the bumps. Why did she have to hit us just because we attempted to converse with that emo once? We even walked nearby every single time. Perhaps she'll run into that blue-haired girl. But how do we bring them together? And he vanishes in a flash. A yellow flash, then reappears somewhere else. I want to be like that. Databane. People would recognize me wherever I went, unable to ignore me. Maybe I could even become Hokage too. Then they'd have to stop ignoring me. She wants to do it as well. Yeah, maybe we can assist her. But then he said, why don't you just ask them? But you two don't talk. So, I'm not sure what to call you. If only I could speak fox, Titabane, Narumi grumbled to herself. She blinked, realizing her arms were empty, and looked around, discovering the twin foxes were over by the water, drawing in the mud. Aren't those the words? What's on the signs, for example? Both twins felt like facepalming because it had been so long that they only remembered the most basic words and their own names. They had written down the nicknames that Hinata had given them, thankfully knowing how to draw those because they were quite common. But their sister didn't know how to read, which both of them had forgotten they had only learned in the academy. They flinched as a spike of rage rolled over them from above, and their wide-eyed gazes snapped to the location. Narumi noticed this and followed their terrified expressions. It was strange that the follower had reacted like that, but to what? It was strange, no matter how they thought of it. Was it because Narumi didn't know how to read? But wasn't that normal for them? Was it because of something one of them did? Haruna. All three girls jumped at the quiet question. Well, two foxes first straightened in fright as their faces jerked towards the sound. And the human girl actually did jump before turning around to see a pale-eyed brunette wearing a cute yukata. Hinata finally noticed the differences, as well as the two fox heads that protruded from the flowers in front of her. I apologize. She quickly bowed. May I ask who you are? Maybe there was a god of luck, because he had just answered their prayers. This was their first friend, and maybe she could be Narumi's. Though they rarely saw each other, not even a handful of times, they had taken a liking to the girl. She was so nice that there wasn't any dark to feel when the girl was alone. She was the only person they'd ever had sneak up on them. There was another presence just outside the forest that they felt was watching them, but the twin foxes dismissed that as paranoia caused by the sneaky child. It was a first for Narumi to have someone talking to her like this. The girl wasn't glaring, looking at her strangely, or scared. Every kid she had ever seen had been warned to stay away from her. She could even hear parents telling their kids, or other kids warning their friends of what their parents said. She wasn't showing any anger or disgust. She wasn't laughing at her. She wasn't telling any lies. She wasn't doing anything that made her feel uneasy. She wasn't doing much of anything. No. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. The girl replied, still stunned, but hopeful of not eliciting a negative response with her name. Such a simple response, to those who didn't recognize her, was practically taboo if she wanted to be treated normally like everyone else. Hinata paused. Wasn't that the name mentioned by the ramen chef? It's a pleasure to meet you. Narumi gaped openly for the first time in her life. Second, someone had replied kindly. She was dense, maybe, but she knew the difference. But nobody was kind to her. Wait, wasn't this called formal? She didn't really care. Databane. Ano, are you playing? Narumi blinked a few times, trying to remember what she was doing, then looked at the written words on the ground. I was asking their names, but I'm not a reader. Hinata's brows furrowed. Why couldn't she read? Shouldn't that have been taught years ago? Hinata could read almost everything around her. So could Neji. Wasn't it required for the academy? She had heard that even orphans were taught by the matron. And if Naruto was an orphan like the twins, then shouldn't he have been taught? Fayuna. Are those your given names? Narumi looked down at her newfound friends, who happily nodded. Wow, Hinata-chan, you're incredible. Ch-chan. The suffix made her face flush. Amen. Thank you very much. I wouldn't have known if you hadn't stopped by. Narumi smiled brightly, ignoring the brunette's glowing blush. And there she goes again, as I recall her doing before. Oh, yes, I recall her. She was always passing out for the strangest of reasons. And then she falls, said Hyuga, collapsed unconscious into the soft grass. Narumi blinked owlishly, perplexed by the girl's sudden disappearance as she opened her eyes from the large smile, her gaze drifting to find the fallen body. Hinata, are you alright? What occurred? Hello, don't leave me. Get up. Please, get up. The two foxes patted their way around to the unconscious girl's cheek, licking either side, ignoring their panicked, almost tearful sister. And soon enough the girl had awoken due to the twins' efforts, calming the crying and frantic redhead and leaving a flustered brunette. A masked ANBU watched on from above, ready to intervene when the Hyuga heiress collapsed. But when the fox kits moved, she forcefully stopped herself. She also knew of the Hyuga guard outside the forest watching in, and despite the forest obscuring much of the chakra presence, it was still visible to her senses. If he hadn't moved either, it probably wasn't too dangerous. After realizing the girl was fine, she could safely say that watching the children's antics was, to put it mildly, amusing. Passing out from being thanked and waking up to animals licking her face was probably extremely embarrassing. Still, she could feel the foxes were powerful. There wasn't a chakra presence from them to indicate so, but her instincts were telling her that was false. They felt of the forest itself. Even training ground 44 didn't have such presence anymore, and the feeling was spread throughout Konoha. It wasn't bad, but it made her uncomfortable knowing about it. Unlike others, she realized the comforting presence was act. And for the foxes to feel nearly identical to the forest, she truly believed they were dangerous if provoked, though neither showed any action other than playfulness or comfort. Still, having such an existence next to her ward so frequently, so close, was not enjoyable to say the least. Hiruzen watched as one of his ANBU walked in. Nico reporting in, she said, nodding to her leader. Then you made contact, and the shift was successful, she said, taking a deep breath. A while later, the elderly man sat alone, and the weathered Hokage sighed. If Nico's report was correct, he at least had answers to many of his questions, but far more had easily come to replace them. Worse, he had unintentionally stunted the Uzumaki girl's knowledge and growth, which made him regret every year he had lived. Narumi may have had a caretaker to provide her basic needs and an ANBU from his force to ensure the girl's constant safety for her first 6 years of life, but he had neglected to have her teach the more advanced skills a child needs to learn. He realized protocol demanded she not be cited unless absolutely necessary, and the ANBU most likely took care of the girl's needs in secret. Had he not been forced with so many different difficulties following the Kyubi attack, such a lack in basic oversight would not have occurred, which was not his intention, but is often indirectly stated within the reports. If this is true, he could only blame himself. He had yet again failed his duty. The rest of the report was equally disturbing. If the report is correct, the presence, a supposedly calming entity that had constantly kept him on edge, was supposedly the forest itself. According to Nico, she only realized it after being there long enough to notice with the fox siblings nearby. They had some connection to it as well, probably as either the source of the presence while the forest spread it. It made sense, but he couldn't figure out why. Was the Kyubi's chakra involved in some way? It didn't matter. He now knew how they avoided people. Empaths, they could feel emotions. That was not a sensory type that could be easily avoided. He doubted that even Rude and Bu could avoid such a skill, despite their training. Worse, they were intelligent. Intelligent enough to not only understand language, but to read and write at least basic structure, something that had apparently been overlooked in Narumi's preparation for the academy. More than that, if they were truly as intelligent as stated, they would easily spot a normal trap laid out to them. And if they were practically a part of the forest, as Nico believes, there was little, if anything, that could be used to ensnare them. If the presence he had recently felt was any indication, then they were simply playing with the kids, avoiding everyone else, and drawing the two most emotionally harmed children into their comfort. Nico had said that the closer she was to the foxes inside the forest, the calmer she felt, but that backfired, removing any ease that settled for that very reason. But if the fox siblings were empaths, they might have traversed the village to find Narumi, just for a different reason. If they felt a child in pain through their empathic ability, they might want to approach that child in an attempt to help. They could use their presence to comfort the lonely child. Of course, this was all hypothetical, a highly unlikely scenario. However, it was the only one that fit thus far. Unfortunately, he couldn't approach the only possible outside source without cause, Hyuga Hinata, the clan's heiress, who was too politically important to approach. According to the report, there was no just cause to question the child. The issue is whether it's the forest itself spreading the influence, or the fox siblings themselves. If they were releasing such massive amounts of chakra to do so, Konoha, he should have felt it long ago. There were far too many unknowns for him to bear. Narumi sat in the nearly empty classroom, waiting. As usual, she enjoyed her morning ramen, which had recently begun to change but still tasted amazing. She couldn't figure out why, but her body felt a little better as well. It wasn't just easier to move around, but she felt quicker, lighter, and her body could bend better as if she were taking off some thick clothes or something. His eyes went to her, and she could just feel the annoyance in his demeanor as he realized who she was, another kid who had been told mean things about her. Sighing, she let her head fall to the ground. Was it really too much to ask for a single person not to be offended by her mere presence? Everywhere she goes, someone is always saying something about her and keeping the others away, even if she didn't do anything wrong. The sounds of footsteps drew her attention once more. Black hair-shaped kind of duck, but like what kind of hairstyle is that? Did he like ducks? Eep, I apologize. Another brown-haired boy entered, followed by Hinata. She waved, smiling, hoping to get her attention. Hearing a sound next to her, she paused. Looking towards her side, she found duck hair sitting next to her. She looked left. A window. Right, left, no empty seat. Her head struck the table once more. Doesn't that hurt? As she lifted her head, Narumi's gaze turned to the side, and the police boy looked at her with concern. And then, I'm fine, why are you talking to me? Why would I not? Shouldn't your mother have told you to stay away? Or something? She wondered. She watched as the perplexed boy looked at her as if she were insane. No, it was simple, but it had given her hope, and she brightened visibly. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. What about you? Mine? He asked again, as if she were insane. How do you not realize this? Because I don't. Narumi blinked owlishly, then frowned. And I don't want to call you a duck head or anything. Duck head, huh? Your hair looks like the buttocks of a duck, Titebane. I was thinking you might like ducks or something. Not at all. Duck butt yelled. But Narumi tried. Stop talking. Give him a break. The redhead looked around and found herself surrounded by girls. Don't talk to Sasuke-sama. You have no business being here. He's evil, according to Mama. Keep your distance from him. Leave Sasuke-sama alone. The more it went on, the more Narumi wanted to simply disappear, until she finally jumped on the desk and tried running out the door, only to be stopped when she plowed into a wall. My, what have we here? Already attempting to avoid class. Well, perhaps we can come up with a suitable punishment. Despite the soft-spoken words, Narumi found the woman's voice frightening, and she shivered at the glare. A few moments later, the emotional child was standing in the hallway with a bucket of water in each hand, unable to hear what was going on inside, but she refused to cry no matter how hard they tried. Is there any sign of her yet? No, I'm not sure where she is. Classes ended hours ago. I've been waiting outside her apartment, but no one has arrived. Her follower appeared earlier and is still here, so I'm going inside. Shadow wasn't watching her in class, eh? No, she wasn't. I'm going in now to get her. Be careful. The evening light was plenty for the red-furred fox to see as she slipped through the shadows. Her stealth skills had recently improved, enhancing her evasion skills from before the incident. Quickly, the girl found her way to a still open window, and Wall walked through it. The empty classroom was filled with unique scents, but none of them were related to her target. Padding to the door, she realized it wouldn't be easy, if at all, to open in her current shape, so she quickly shifted to her human form, turned the handle, and vanished back into fur. Haruna nosed her way through the small gap and kept sniffing until she found the correct scent. A few moments later, she was staring at a trembling redhead with 2 buckets sloshing water out from the jerky shakes, tears streaming down her face, displaying her obvious pain. Oh no. What? Torture with buckets? What? Is it already? We're heading to Ikaraku. Please meet us there. It didn't stop the taunts or jokes at her expense. A few had even tried pushing her over, hoping for the buckets to spill. She knew that would get her in even more trouble. But when class ended, the teacher told her to do it until dark. Only then could she leave. A sudden fuzz against her leg startled her, and she looked down at the red bundle worming its way around her legs. Haruna. I'll come with you in a while, it said, looking up and nodding. I must stay and finish. Hearing a growl, the redhead jumped, spilling some water, astounded by her fox pal's attitude. She was growling. The sound got louder and louder, which scared her. Oh okay, we'll go. I simply need to empty the ease. Narumi set one down and went to toss the water, then the other, and put the buckets up. Her arms had never felt so dead to her. They were wiggly as jello. She followed the little fox out of the building, opening doors to use her back and legs instead of her arms. Only when she was close to the smell of heaven did she notice her path, and her soreness practically vanished as she ran ahead. Jai-san. Ho-ho, have you returned a second time today? How did you find your first day at the academy? The dead tired child almost didn't notice the fox hop onto her lap as she proceeded to fill him in on Duck Butt Boy, the girl gang, and evil buckets. Her surprising happiness at such a terrible day put a frown on the old man's face. He couldn't believe she was happy, or maybe it was because of him and the ramen. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he was sure she was happy, and apparently just being there was enough for her, as sad as that thought was, so he stayed quiet and let her talk. Chuchai didn't want to ruin her improving mood. Despite her cheerful demeanor, it didn't rub off. The chef's stiff smile indicated that this was not a pleasant night. Pink-slitted eyes watched as a tuft of red exited a classroom doorway once more. She's out. Again. This adds up to 2 weeks. Longer than ours. What's the difference? But what can we do? She can't learn if no one is willing to assist her. We can assist. But how? We can't force the teacher to do anything. And we can't even show ourselves because people try to chase us down every time we're seen. And our human form is even worse. Who knows what would happen if they discovered the 2 of us not going to the academy? Compel us to leave. Yes, but what if they question us? What if they examine us? Who knows what else? Dreadful things. Stop doing that. We can educate her ourselves. How so? Because almost everything we learned was a lie. Most but not all of us know how to read, write. Yes, but not nearly enough. We'd need to visit the library or something. Yes, the library. Wrong idea. But it's all we've got. I'll get her out of the hall and see if you can get something from the library to help us read, or ask Jai-san for assistance. Jumping from branch to branch, a tuft of blonde descended to the ground, before shooting off towards an open window. She didn't care that the room was full, just jumped through anyways. The open door was her aim, shooting through the window. Her aim proved true, landing her against the wall outside the door. Fiuna ignored the surprised shouts from behind, stopping behind her sister, who was filling buckets of water again, an unimaginative teacher, perhaps, but certainly a painful punishment, and growling, water splashed everywhere as the redhead whirled around. Narumi sprinted away, an insanely happy sister already following her. It didn't take long for the pair to slip through the streets, the fox child remaining hidden, and towards the ramen stand, which would obviously be empty soon. But they didn't take any chances. Fiuna led her into the building's back door. Is it going to pick up soon, Jai-san? No, it'll be another quiet day. Why? Ni-chan is on her way, Emen. Oh, she doesn't have to assist today. A single one of you is more than enough. Another Ni-chan. Chuchai raised an eyebrow at his little assistant. Isn't she in class? They kicked her out again, Haruna lamented. Fiuna is escorting her here. We were wondering if you could recommend a good book to help us learn to read. Chuchai's features had hardened unnaturally. I thought I told you both not to approach her. Eh? But her follower Shadow isn't keeping an eye on her at the academy. She'll be coming by herself instead. Have her back before the last hour of academy. Just to be safe, the ramen chef said, still irritated. Have her back before the last hour of academy. Just to be safe. Hello, exclaimed Haruna, as well as a dictionary. Visit a bookstore rather than a library. If you need help with hiragana and katakana, let me know. The dictionary should show you the rest from there. He walked out the door with a steaming bowl. Haruna dashed towards the other door and opened it just in time, forgetting to express her gratitude. Hurry in. The blonde watched as the redhead giggled, finally catching her sister, and she followed suit after seeing the distraught appearance of her fox-shaped sister. It took a moment for both to calm down. Narumi let the struggling fox go before realizing that someone else had been laughing with her. Then the smells hit, and she knew it was Ikaraku's. Only then did she look at the other person, gasping. Fayuna waved, unintentionally distracting Narumi from seeing Haruna shapeshift into a human right behind her. You're so adorable. She felt arms wrap around her just as she was about to leap forward and hug the strangely familiar girl, somehow comfortable enough to want physical contact. Narumi was stiff from the unexpected contact. It was a strange sensation. She had seen others do it, and had almost done it automatically herself. It was almost foreign, with only her Gigi doing it every now and then. Looking back, she found herself in the same hugging she had tried to put the other fox-eared girl in. Hey, Narumi furrowed her brows. Why are you referring to me as that? What is your name? She shifted anxiously back and forth between the two fox sisters. The redhead didn't know why, but she didn't want to be rejected by these two at all. How do I explain? Perhaps just get it out there. So, we're your sisters. Kind of. Perhaps, but not quite. How come we don't know? Huh? Now even more perplexed, she chose the one word that made sense among the strange look-alike girls conversing. Sisters. Probably. Do I have any sisters? Narumi exhaled, wide-eyed, as the twins, they had to be, looked between each other again, pulled their hair away from their faces to reveal something only seen in a mirror before nodding. Kaya. She lunged at the sister in front of her, hugging her tightly. I have sisters, she exclaimed. I really have sisters. Don't forget about me, the other said, completing the three-way hug. Narumi found herself snuggled between two soft and cozy tails, of course attached to the sisters, as they called them, but the tails. They all jumped at the same time as a male voice coughed. Shouldn't one of you be heading towards the bookstore? I'll go. Do you require funds? But where is it? Haruna removed herself, pulled her hood up, and hid her tail, exiting the door a moment later after profusely thanking Tuchai for the pocket change. Tuchai was serving another round outside when Fayuna and Narumi realized they were alone. Okay, so where to begin? Fayuna asked, tilting her head. My name, I guess. Titaben, Uzumaki Fayuna. Do you do that as well? I guess we all do. Fayuna blushed. My name is Uzumaki Narumi. What happened to Fayuna? Fayuna's face resembled a tomato as she remembered her previous predicament. As she walked through the corridors, Narumi's gaze was fixed on the ground. She was truly happy for the first time in her life. She had siblings, family. Despite this, she was unable to show it. She had a lot of things explained to her, and a lot of it made her feel awful. Were the teachers attempting to avoid teaching her? It explained why she had been kicked out of class so frequently. Because she was cursed with this strange fox thing. She had no idea how it could possibly fit. But now she had a reason why no one liked her. They weren't fond of the fox in her stomach. They took their rage out on her. That was something she didn't know how to deal with. What should she have done? Her sisters didn't know much about it either. The only difference was that the fox was inside her, not outside of her. At least, they didn't believe it. She was perplexed, and the fact that they were perplexed only added to her confusion. It was also perplexing. Her sisters were in even worse shape. When they didn't hide their appearance, they apparently looked like a fox. Anyone who saw them, other than Jai-san, would try to harm them. They didn't show anyone, but they claimed to have sensed the people who pursued them in the forest. Not all, but the majority of them were frightening. They've been avoiding people for so long. They had each other. It also explained why she had been unaware of them. Of course, she wouldn't know if they were hiding. Even Gigi had no idea. How could he have missed it? He was well versed in everything, but he had no idea. But why didn't they let Gigi in on the secret? Narumi refused to tell anyone about them. She had family and didn't want them to despise her. They also stated that if anyone came after them, they would have to hide. People would come after them if she told others. Narumi didn't believe everything they said, but she also couldn't say they were lying. Gigi, for example, had no idea, or that others would harm them. How could they make ramen if everyone despised it? But if she told anyone, they'd vanish, and she didn't want that. Her whiskers were even there. Narumi wished for ears and a tail as well. Nonetheless, she refused to discuss them. No, she would go to any length to keep them. What surprised her was that they had been entertaining her whenever they could. It was amazing how they could transform into foxes as well. She wished to be able to do so. Narumi would find a way no matter what. And what have you been doing? Narumi was startled by the stern, malicious voice. She hadn't heard the door open behind her after walking past her classroom by accident. I have been. It doesn't matter, you're going to be standing here all night. The woman sneered. Narumi felt more than puzzled indifference or sadness for the first time in a long time. Now there was finally some rage. This woman was forcing her to leave class in order to harm her and keep her away. No, and if you force me, I'll tell Gigi I've learned nothing. The irritated redhead didn't understand much, but it had been explained that she was supposed to be learning. She couldn't learn unless she was in class. That's what the twins claimed, that they were forced to attend class in their final year, and that any punishment was supposed to be related to classwork. No, not buckets. Gigi, snorted the woman. Who would take in a jerk like you? Narumi frowned. I'm not evil. And Gigi is Gigi. All ninja follow Gigi. They have to do what he says if the Hokage Gigi gives them orders. Even if her sisters told her not to tell him anything about them, saying they didn't trust him, she did. He would assist against mean teachers who did not teach her as they were supposed to. The woman's entire demeanor changed as she realized the Uzumaki boy had noticed what she was doing. I'll give you a warning today. She tried to cheer up. Now, wait here until class is finished. Your punishment for today isn't finished yet. Narumi frowned once more, but nodded. Maybe she wasn't being allowed to learn, as her sisters were convinced. She even used Gigi's name, which she never did. Blue eyes lingered at the classroom door. Kaya, you've arrived. Naru was startled by the sudden squeal because he hadn't heard the door open. As she twisted, her fur stood on end, only to be flattened to the ground. She scowled at the increasing occurrence, attempting to ignore the warmth pressing against her. You need to stay here longer tonight. I never get to see either of you. The brunette drew back, a smile on her face as she looked at the frustrated violet eyes. Don't be silly. You like it. She sighed and shifted as the other girl let her up. Naru couldn't find much energy, even though it wasn't in her nature to be the calm one. Not that any Uzumaki she knew was inherently calm. Her memories bothered her. Listening to Narumi talk about a few things in her life had brought so many facts to light, and having a slightly wider perspective to see from had brought so many facts to light. But, most importantly, she needed to learn. We can, but you must teach us to read, okay? Okay. Ayan smiled before glomping the fox girl once more. As she struggled to breathe, Naru couldn't help but wonder where her calm Ayamni had gone. Naru observed her sister leaving the classrooms. It was much later than the girl should have left, but something had changed. She couldn't tell, but Narumi was giving off a prank vibe. She recognized that sensation anywhere, but it didn't explain the different something. Her aura was a little darker than usual. Perhaps the prank was intended for a purpose other than gaining attention. The instructor. She's going to play a joke on the teacher. Really? Definitely. She's got the look. The one that says retaliation. As in pranking Kiba. I'm curious to see what she does. Me too. We'll have to pay attention for the next few days. Let's work together. But won't we? We will, of course. But we don't have to tell her we're assisting her. Let us double it. Let her do her thing while we do ours. That will put the mean teacher on the spot. I like your way of thinking. Because I am you. Twin smirks appeared on the twins' faces. One is on a human and the other is on a fox. They threatened the highest level of humiliation, and they knew exactly how to do it. A lone figure was visible at the window of an academy classroom. Important structures in Konoha are usually guarded. Some are assigned by Chunin or Jounin, while others are assigned by ANBU to protect important objects or information. While this is also true for the academy building, the classrooms themselves are worthless. So, when this figure slid the window open, there was no one in range or sight to see. Uzumaki Narumi noticed two strange changes the next morning. First and foremost, she had not only ordered her favorite food, ramen, but she had also been able to greet her newly discovered sibling sister through an open door. She was barely visible, but just enough to exchange a greeting. When the other sibling appeared on her lap, she squealed and hugged the quickly distressed sibling, only releasing her when food appeared. She had seen both of them that morning. She couldn't, however, go hug her other sisters. They didn't want anyone to know about their ears or tail because they were following her, or even that she was aware of their existence, or for anyone other than Tuchai Jisen to be aware of their existence. That was still something she didn't like, but Narumi wouldn't say anything about it for fear of losing them. She had promised. Only now did the blue-eyed girl realize who was allowing her to eat every day. In the still partially dark morning, her eyes widened. Ikaraku had been opening earlier, and for free for her to eat, and it was all because of her sisters. Narumi was almost in tears. Nonetheless, she ate and proceeded to the academy. A small kin in her shorts reminded her of what she needed to do. It wasn't until the girl was halfway there that she noticed the small patch of red following her. Narumi picked up her sister, relieved to have family around her, and, for the first time, not hiding from the onlookers on the street. Though she didn't notice the sparks of rage when she saw her and the fox together, she could finally begin her plan within the confines of the academy building. Behind the teacher's desk in her classroom, a quick pop and a few minutes later, both red hair and fur were smirking in the student desks. A few of the kids eventually made their way through the door, ignoring the dozing mop of red hair. The redhead was jolted awake by the screech of a moving chair next to her. Narumi checked her side, blearily blinking, and soon realized it was the girl from the forest beside her for the first time. Naruto-san. Hello na and Naruto-san. Narumi smiled brightly, causing the other girl to flush profusely. Hello, do you? Calm down. The unexpected intrusion startled Narumi. Looking around, she noticed the teacher frowning at the rapidly quieting children. She then turned to face her. Narumi was taken aback by the sudden shift from stern unpleasantness to unbridled hatred. She'd seen a lot of people dislike her, but this was the most public the whiskered girl had ever seen. What does this mean? How dare you bring a fox into my classroom? Get out of my classroom. This startled not only her, but the entire class. The pure venom in her voice was palpable in the air. Her eyes appeared to be made of hellfire. The class shivered in fear as her body shook with murderous intent. Narumi, who had been on the receiving end of many people producing this strange feeling, had accepted it without question. It was a little stronger than usual. A growl, while obviously light in pitch and tone, but deep in nature, quickly drew the attention of those in a better position. Many people turned to look at the fox in question. In fact, a few people recognized it from rumors, and one or two may have seen it months ago but weren't sure. I said, get out, or I'll silence the demon myself. While Narumi had no idea what was going on, she knew it was in her best interests to get her sister out. When she attempted to touch the red fox, it twitched away, keeping its gaze fixed on the sensei. Fine, she exclaimed, tossing something too quickly for the children to see. Everyone's attention was drawn to a loud poof of smoke. Even Narumi couldn't figure out what had happened. Her perplexed sister appeared one moment, and smoke appeared the next. The woman turned cold eyes on the demon child, satisfied with her outcome, but uneasy that it was a clone. I said, get out, she said coldly as she moved to sit in her chair. The kids shivered. A few people eventually discovered the kunai hidden within the desk behind Narumi, until she settled in for a wet squelch. The middle-aged woman stood up quickly, looking back at her chair, only to feel dust fall from above. Her chair was the same color as before, a dirty brown, but it was now clearly covered in paint. Just after the dust had settled, the woman noticed a hole in the ceiling. However, the glitter all over indicated the nature of the glitter. Her usual Chunin attire was now brown all across her back, dazzling everyone in the room with the prank. The woman's rage flared up once more. She turned around, cursing the demonic child who was clearly laughing at her, oblivious to the snickers, giggling, and laughing students who surrounded the evil boy. I'll kill you. Hiruzen had returned to his usual morning snooze. He could see most of Konoha from the rooftop. People were going about their daily lives, getting ready to face the world as they prepared for work. Hashirama's ninja traversing the rooftops and trees that littered the village streets as he grew the original housing and market areas. The hilarious antics of a few people whom most would consider insane, but who are actually acting insane in order to avoid going insane. It was a peaceful image, but it was not to last. The Hokage shivered violently as a darkening malevolence sprouted nearby. It wasn't so bad at first. It was more like an annoyance expressing itself, but then there was a shift to anger. Worryingly, killing intent was infiltrating one of the classrooms. It was all over in a matter of seconds, but anything can happen in that amount of time. The god of shinobi had awakened before even his ANBU realized it. They hadn't even seen him move. His aging body shouldn't have been able to do so, but he was simply gone. They did, however, know where he had gone and were on his tail. What they discovered surprised them. Their Hokage was holding an academy teacher's hand, a cocked hand ready to throw a kunai at a student, one that appeared to have been thrown at just seconds before. The fact that the woman was sparkling had to be the strangest. What the hell is going on in here? The anger was obvious even though the words were spoken normally. When she realized who had stopped her hand from killing the demonic child, the stuttering teacher was obviously terrified for her life. For the ANBU, her incoherent words were nothing more than gibberish. It only got worse when a few more Jounin and Chunin appeared inside the room, followed by several Jounin and Chunin outside the window. Whatever had occurred was not a minor occurrence. From afar, a red fox observed her sister's classroom. It was the same tree as before, a colorful tree with lush leaves that easily concealed her appearance. Oh no, I'm not kidding. Hey, do you remember what happened? Huh? How did I know that? It makes no difference. Narumi is following the Hokage. What about the instructor? Those masked people are stealing her. Yes, she was always so cruel. But our sister is in trouble, and it's all our fault. However, all you did was show up. No, you do not. But, no, not unless we know she's in serious trouble. Okay. Haruna lay down on the high branch, restraining herself from following her sister but keeping her gaze visibly directed to where she felt the familiar sensation that defined Narumi. It was going to be a long day. Hiruzen sighed, exhausted. The small child in front of him was trembling, knowing that she was somehow to blame for everything. Despite the fact that this was not the case, he was certain it wasn't. Even with the brief summary provided by another student, he was certain that none of this was her fault. He had a chance here, but he wasn't sure he wanted to take it. But the earlier feeling, it's fine, Naru-chan, just explain what happened. Her tearing eyes raised. Oh okay Jiji. Sensei told me to leave again and to take Haru-chan with me, but Haru-chan growled. I've never heard her growl, but Sensei was mad. Really mad. I tried to grab Haru-chan to take her out, but she moved away. Sensei got even angrier, and Sensei did something to make Haruna go away. Narumi sobbed. As he listened, he let out another tired sigh. There were some odd points that he picked up on, and he didn't like them. And, as much as he wanted to know about the fox, he needed to focus on the rest first. If it couldn't avoid a simple kunai, perhaps the sibling Vulpines weren't as dangerous as he thought, despite the feelings they elicited. His instincts told him otherwise, but every visible fact indicated that they were completely peaceful, until now. That was entirely due to Narumi. How many times has your teacher dismissed you from class? Wait, every day. Hiruzen's heart sank. What had happened? How could he have let it happen so easily? What happened? Did she let you back in? Narumi furrowed her brows, having forgotten why the teacher had actually sent her out, according to her sisters and what her sensei had said each day. No, I was told to hold buckets of water until dark, Dadabane. That kind of training hurts. Now the old man truly felt his age. His age may not be that old yet, but this made him feel twice as old. He was missing a lot of information about this girl's life, and the more he learned, the more he regretted not getting detailed reports from multiple sources. They were either withholding information or being manipulated. It was unusual to receive reports directly, which obviously caused many problems. But there simply wasn't time. But it was getting easier. Narumi blushed. Though I kinda want to be in the classroom with the other Titebane. Despite everything, her mother's verbal tick was gradually dissolving the pain. We'll fix that, Narumi, but how did your fox friend go missing? Narumi looked down, clearly upset, into a cloud. I'm not sure, but you gotta make Sensei bring her back. Determination illuminated her features. Hiruzen laughed. Don't worry, my dear, if it was smoke, then your friend is fine. She clearly used a jutsu, a clone jutsu, which is concerning, allowing her to escape unharmed. Perhaps the foxes were dangerous after all. It is unusual for a wild animal to be able to use jutsu. Really, Haru-chan is alright. Yatta. Finally, the elderly Cage was smiling. It was always nice to have her around. Now, why did you paint her chair and sprinkle glitter on the ceiling? Stunned from her frolicking, Narumi took on a guilty expression, rubbing the back of her head. She was always making me hold the buckets, not letting me be with the others, and she was, so serious. Yeah, that's it. Mean and serious. She needed to stop, make her have fun. The Cage watched as the redhead prankster became confused. Has another child also pranked the woman? And the fox appears on the same day. That is far too chance. I'd appreciate it if you could introduce me to your fox friends as soon as possible. And do you know why Haru-chan came with you today? He mixed his words, preventing the child from properly responding to his request, and preventing her from declining. Narumi cocked her chin. I dunno, maybe she'll come back. I really hope so. Her eyes widened. Oh no, Fuyu-chan is going to be sad. Her sister's gone, and I have no idea where. The Hokage chuckled at the frantic child once more. Haruna watched as a flash of red left the Hokage's residence. She'd seen how the class had been told to self-study for the day, but it was clear that Narumi wouldn't be returning. And the speed she was running, not to mention her expression, indicated that something was wrong. She nodded to her side, and a blur flew from the tree. Narumi was hurrying towards Ikaraku's ramen, concerned about her sister. She had to be certain, no matter what Jiji said. However, the time it took to get there was excessive. Her feet were moving faster and faster. As the flaps fluttered behind her, she huffed. She crawled up onto the seat, ignoring the people talking animatedly beside her. Something fuzzy landed in her lap just as she was about to open her mouth. Narumi looked down at the red and blonde face staring up at her, startled. "Haru-chan, you're okay. I was so worried, Databane," she exclaimed. Haruna purred into the loving embrace, despite the slight sensation of being crushed. Her efforts were successful in reducing the tightness. After all, she didn't want to vanish again. They had been arguing about various topics while their sister was speaking with the Hokage. The most important was how Fayuna knew what was going on inside the classroom, and they were eager to put it to the test as soon as possible. If they both truly received the memories, they could accomplish so much more. Though it would be strange for them to both remember the same thing, they were once the same. Naru appeared out the back door, puzzled as to why her non-fox sister was there. She avoided being seen by the others outside, despite the fact that she could feel one of them becoming enraged. The sight of her sister being hugged made her laugh. Then she blinked confusedly as Narumi picked up her foxy sister and looked her in the eyes. "Never do that to me again," Narumi said sweetly. Naru swears she saw her sister smirking as her twins' amusement reached an all-time high thanks to their hazy emotional link. Then there was a poof, and Narumi's hands vanished, leaving her sister staring blankly at the spot. That night, many people would be perplexed by several sources of hidden laughter and one of indignant outrage. A golden fox lay in front of a door to an apartment. She was truly one of a kind, with 4 red stripes originating around her eyes, 2 flowing to the tufts of fur within her ears, and 2 more down each side of her face, upper back, and tail tip. She hadn't noticed the opening of a door or the small footsteps of the girl exiting it because she had been waiting there in the cool morning for a little too long. She didn't even move when the door slammed shut. When the child stumbled across her, she not only awoke, but the little fox found herself in midair, quickly heading towards the ground at the bottom of the steps. The girl was wide-eyed at the sudden change, and she only just kept herself from falling by using the railing to her side. As soon as she was nearly stable, a yellow ball of fuzzy caught her eye, and she watched as it landed safely on all 4 of its legs. It looked around for a moment, obviously perplexed, before looking up at her and putting it all together. Narumi was taken aback when she heard a growl, and noticed the little gold fuzzball shook its head. Not only Haruna, but also Fayuna growled, despite the fact that Fuyu-chan appeared to do so at herself. Narumi was perplexed because her fox sister was not looking at anyone. But that was the only thing she could think of. It returned her gaze as it came to a halt, then twisted its head sideways, a universal symbol for follow. She did so cheerfully, a bright smile on her face. It was once again very early in the morning, just before dawn. This would be the only time Ikaraku's would be empty, the only time when no one was around to give her a hard time. However, it was also the only time when people experimented, so she tried to remain hidden once more as the redhead went to get breakfast. Her sister, on the other hand, wasn't putting in nearly as much effort. A sudden thunk and poof paused her mid-stride. She moved her gaze slowly to where the small form of a fox should have been, had been, and no longer was. There was only a kunai in its place. Kaya. Narumi looked around, wide-eyed, and saw no one. She couldn't see anyone from the rooftops. Her body shook as she realized the kunai could have been aimed at her as well. Furthermore, if her sister hadn't used that strange jutsu to escape, she might have died. The little red-headed fox container moved much more slowly and carefully towards breakfast. It may have taken a little longer than usual, but she was not going to let that happen to her. Inu launched a kunai. He'd been watching and observing for years. He had originally intended to accept missions. The more he took, the riskier it became. The more he could distract himself from the pain, the better. He couldn't get any closer to anyone, but he also refused to let anyone on his team perish. Never, ever again. That was when the Hokage approached him a few years later. The daughter of his sensei had been attacked. It wasn't the first time anyone tried anything. He knew it wasn't, but it was the first time it went beyond a simple assassination attempt. People didn't realize it at first, but word spread about the child after she was allowed to roam the streets freely rather than being cooped up in her apartment. The civilians were too reminded of that night by Narumi's red hair. It wouldn't have meant much if she hadn't kept the beast at the center of their grief at bay. The sheer number of deaths that night was frightening. Most had been caused by the creature suddenly appearing and crushing the buildings beneath. But it was still more than 1,000 people. Hundreds of people were shredded with every few steps or wave of its tails. People were dying because it was so moving. As a result, when they found red, they saw red. It took a few days, but it eventually happened. And he couldn't say no when he was asked to protect her at night while another ANBU captain worked the day shift. Not after discovering that his last link was in jeopardy. It was a 12-hour shift and an S-rank mission per week, but it was well worth his time. He'd been watching her grow for a while, seeing how she gradually took to hiding, avoiding groups wherever she went, except during the day with masses around, and attempting to find the few who wouldn't mock her very existence every day. So far, the list was short, almost non-existent. There were only a few times when he was required, but they were brief. His orders were to keep his identity a secret unless absolutely necessary. His attention was immediately drawn when it was reported that he had made contact with a couple of foxes. They weren't the demon fox, but it was still out of the ordinary. He listened, waited, and even watched a few times. He knew regular foxes were nothing like them, and while he had nothing against the animal, he was still suspicious of everything. They were both unusually intelligent. Further investigation led him to the forest and the recent mysterious chakra flow around Konoha. Nico's observations aided this, as did the Hokage's experienced insight, but they hadn't quite grasped everything. He hadn't either, but he could tell there was more to both than a connection to the forest and emotionally soothing chakra. While he may not have harbored any unwarranted ill will, the rest of Konoha did. Furthermore, after observing the creatures, he felt a sense of kinship with them as they not only played with the girl, but also seemed to help his sensei's terrified recollection. This was heightened when he learned that they were outing the teacher who had gone out of her way to keep Narumi from even entering her academy classroom. Slowly but steadily, the foxes increased their efforts to assist his ward, to keep her from being completely isolated, even if it was only with animals. Even this morning, when it was possible that the girl had been injured, he could tell that it was entirely accidental. And the fact that the golden fox became enraged at itself told him far more than anything else. It wasn't the main reason he kept his thoughts and findings to himself, but it was a big part of it. After all, even if he hadn't come across either in their forest, his searches hadn't been as dull or fruitless as the rest of Konoha's. Inu was simply uncomfortable reporting the possibilities in the absence of absolute proof. So when he felt that spike of killing intent, he initially dismissed it because it wasn't aimed at the child herself. But upon closer inspection, he realized it was directed at one of the few who even attempted to approach the child. He couldn't directly stop the attack because it was too late to intervene. Because of his slow reaction time as a result of his initial observation, Inu's kunai hadn't arrived in time to stop the other from attacking. It wasn't aimed directly at the attacker, landing visibly between his feet, but rather as a clear warning that even Genin would notice, and yet it was still too slow. But if the fox avoided, it would put a stop to any further progress. Unfortunately, the attack was successful. Luckily, it was a cage bunshin. He couldn't understand how a fox could use that skill. It's even less clear how a fox knew. But the attacker, a chunin in his 20s, dashed away. He hadn't killed the fox, obviously, and he had simply enraged an ANBU. It was clearly not his morning. Fortunately for him, Inu was more concerned about his ward. After the minor incident, she became even more terrified. She was taking it harder than she should have if she knew it was a clone, but not so hard that she thought the creature had been killed. At the very least, he was grateful for that last bit, and it was good practice for the girl. What surprised him was that both foxes appeared in front of her halfway to her destination. They were running, ignoring anyone who might have been following them, not even noticing that another Genin and Chunin were chasing them from the roofs behind them, attempting to take them out. When Narumi appeared in their vision, they had only slowed. The clone's memories wouldn't reveal how it died, but the fact that it did worried them. Inu fired another warning kunai at the two ninja. While he wasn't sure if these two were the real deal, he didn't want to take any chances. Others might be upset, but the happiness of his sensei's legacy was more important. Her safety was more important, and two shinobi throwing kunai in her direction was no longer acceptable. After all, he had just witnessed the results. Inu was just wondering if they would be following her more closely from now on. What would happen if they did? They draw more attention, more hatred, and many people who want to kill his sensei's daughter while helping. For the first time in the year, Inu did more than just think logically, protect his comrades, kill enemies, and act. He was concerned. This kanji means child, but when combined with that, okay, I am, that's enough, they need to go home. And it's time to close shop, Chuchai grumbled. I'll help. Come on you two, let's get Fuyu-chan. I poked the blonde's ear, but it twitched away. The little fox remained motionless. I'll take her. It's okay. Thank you for helping us, Haruna said as she reached over to take her sister from Iam's lap. The little fox remained motionless. She sighed and shook her head. Petting by another person always seems to put either of them into a deep sleep if it lasts too long. I suppose I should go home. We'll stay later tomorrow night for more assistance. See you then. Ayan smiled. It was returned by the red-headed twin. Haruna drew her cowl up over her head, the eared hood covering her head. It dangled loosely over her upper arms, just above where she held her foxified blonde sister. She carefully manipulated her tail to slip back into her flowery kimono. Another difference from the previous yukata was that its inner layer matched the color of their twins' kimono's outer layer. Her small dainty hands brushed through her sister's fur. Purring soon filled her arms and ears. Haruna smiled as her heart began to warm. She had no idea, but her emotions were broadcast throughout Konoha. Her stronger emotions were always present. It didn't matter what kind, but the ambient chakra that the twins slowly release easily conveys their emotions. And, as usual, the slight change made those around feel a little calmer and more at ease. The child took her usual route through the almost pitch-black night, not paying much attention to her surroundings. Her attention was fixed on the fox in her arms. Even though they didn't normally pet each other, it was something they enjoyed. They weren't as good as Hinata or Aim, but they knew where to look. Kid, put the fox down. Haruna nearly jumped out of her skin when she heard the voice. Her slitted eyes raised to meet the man in front of her. She looked around and realized they were in a dark, nearly pitch-black alley. Though she could still see the man, he was much grayer due to the night skies. Looking back, the kitsune child noticed the man frowning even more deeply. He was dressed in dark pants and a green vest over a black long-sleeved shirt. He was a shinobi of Konoha. She could tell by the holster on one leg and the Konoha headband over his spiky brown hair. Haruna blinked several times before replying with a simple no. The response elicited a serious growl from the shinobi. I said, "Put him down, kid, I'm not playing." Haruna's slit eyes narrowed as she frowned. She didn't notice the man shivering at the sight. Haruna wasn't even irritated. The young lady simply disliked the man. He was directing her actions for no apparent reason. She was not going to listen to anyone telling her to put her sister down, especially when the person was feeling particularly gloomy. Never, ever. She's asleep, so no. He was practically snarling. "Don't say I didn't warn you," exclaimed the shinobi as he charged forward. He was behind Haruna in a split second, and her eyes widened at the unexpected movement. He lowered his hand, aiming for her neck. Haruna turned as quickly as her small frame would allow and saw the arm approaching. Her half-hearted attempt at evasion resulted in her stumbling sideways and tripping over her own feet. The fox form of her sister was flung from her arms. Ignoring the falling child, the shinobi drew a kunai from his holster and hurled it at the fox. He didn't want to do it in front of the cute kid, but the demons had to be extinguished, and she probably wouldn't let him play with the fox again. She not only avoided his blow, but she also moved quickly. That was lightning fast. He was unlikely to knock her out quickly without injuring her. It was better to just get rid of it in front of her than to hurt her by trying to keep her from seeing the sight. Despite the accident, Haruna easily twisted to fall with the attacker facing her, instinctively bracing her fall with her arms. Only then did she notice her floating sister and the thing approaching her. A kunai is heading straight for her. Haruna quickly became frozen as a sickening sound indicated that the blade had clearly sliced through her blonde sister's neck. Haruna's lips trembled in terror at the sight, terrified of what had happened to her sister, but unable to look away from the bloody form of her nearly decapitated sister. Tears threatened to flow until her trembling body forced them to. "Fayuna?" she asked quietly. The blood leaking from the wound was quickly spreading. Only a smidgen of muscle and fur held the two together. Fayuna, HMPH, you shouldn't be upset over an animal kid, especially demon spawn, shrugged the fox killer. He began to turn away when he became aware of something on the ground around him. The man felt a squeeze all around his body before he could look down. He almost missed the complete change in atmosphere because he was startled by the sudden change in the situation, as if the entire world was in pain and anguish. It was such a sudden shift that the presence within Konoha quickly drew the attention of anyone who could feel chakra or had naturally attuned senses to nature, as opposed to before, when it was only noticed by those who were sensitive. The usual calming sensation felt as if it had never existed. No one could feel the village's caring, comforting love any longer. All they felt was the perplexed suffering, the agonizing anguish held within the chakra. Every creature that sensed the sudden change to what had previously been a constant froze. They would not have reacted in this manner if it had been anger or murderous intent. Shinobi would have acted quickly to locate the threat, but this no one was expecting such an outpouring of emotion. It was only a split second later that they felt anger, but it was nothing compared to the agony. Only then did the more powerful within Konoha begin to move around again, fearful of what could soon be a disaster. The cause of this shift had only recently become aware of it. He was too terrified of the glowing slit eyes staring at him, pained in a way he hadn't seen since the Kyubi attack. Looking down, he found himself held within tree trunks. Roots and branches had sprung from the ground to encircle his entirety. His arms and legs were clamped together, with small limbs encircling his body underneath the larger branches. Why? Finally noticing the tears pouring down the child's face, the man truly felt regret. Her voice was quiet, but full of pain. Her suffering was laid bare for him to see, and he couldn't stop from worrying, both about the girl and his predicament. It wasn't difficult to put together. He had just angered a user of Mokyudan. He had just killed the pet of a girl with the same gift of the Shodaime Hokage. I am sorry. You apologize right after you kill her. I asked, why? His heart clenched at the broken voice. The girl was on the verge of collapse. There have been many who has fallen to despair in the war. He had seen them, both enemy and ally alike. It was a terrible scene. Unfortunately, the difference is he had just instilled such into a child, an innocent girl with the ability to crush him where he is. Yet he stopped at the angry glare, Esashi's fox, a spawn of the demon. He didn't get much further. The unnamed shinobi finally noticed the rising anger and killing intent his words were causing. Please, you killed her, because she's a fox. Haruna's temper brought a pulse of energy expelling from her last word, knocking her hood back off her head, making the other person's eyes go wide in disbelief at the lowered fox ears upon her head. Because you think she's a spawn of the demon. She knew it might be true, but they hadn't done anything to anyone. Another pulse of energy blew the wind around them within the small alley, shifting her kimono enough to allow her tail free. This time, the tangled shinobi trembled in fear. He had angered a Mokyudan user, one that looked to be part fox, by killing her pet fox. He could instantly tell that her features weren't fake. The tail had quickly puffed out, bristling with emotion, much like her shifting fox ears. What did we ever do to you? Haruna nearly whispered, trembling, before raising her voice again, her chakra building up for a third time. What did she do to Y? NGH Ni-chan. You're too loud. A quiet groan came from the side. Suddenly, everything froze. Haruna and the captured man stilled at the sudden sound. The atmosphere unmoving and confusing. Both adult and child looked over to see another girl, near identical girl to the first, sitting up from where the fox once laid. What are you so angry for? The blonde rubbed an eye, trying to get the sleep out of it. Fayuna. The redhead nearly sobbed out. Stunned disbelief quickly gave way to incredible happiness. Tremors racked her body before she suddenly crashed into her sister, hugging her tight before actually sobbing for a moment. I thought you were gone. Once more pain intermixed with her other joyous emotions. These was quickly reflected in the atmosphere, removing most of the radiating anguish. Fayuna herself merely blinked in confusion, not knowing what had even happened. There had been a small twinge in her neck when she woke to her sister's yelling, but it hadn't felt all that terrible. Then again, they were almost immune to pain now, considering their games and stunts the two had been pulling lately. Regardless, they recovered. It still hurt, but they ignored it most of the time. I'm not sure what you're saying, but isn't he not supposed to see us? Fayuna asked, pointing to the terrified and tangled man watching the twins. Crap, run. Fayuna jumped to her feet, pulling her sister up with her. Fayuna gave the rooted man a strange look before giggling. They were abandoning him there, forcing him to wait for someone else to assist him in breaking free. When she turned around, she saw a teary-eyed twin waiting for her. When she noticed this, she chased after her, feeling bad. Something bad had to have happened for her sister to be crying, and she had no idea what it was. A masked figure dropped into the alley a split second after the twins vanished, staring off in the direction the twins vanished. For a brief moment, he ignored the man attempting to get his attention, pulling a cloth back over his red and black eye beneath his ANBU mask. The masked man turned around and stared at the Chunin. You will tell no one about this except the Hokage. What you saw is classified to him, and only him. The entangled man vigorously nodded. He was soon freed from the living binds, which were quickly mostly incinerated. Several more figures appeared within a few moments. All of them were notable figures in the village, and they were all prepared to fight. The Hokage, in particular, conducted a quick survey. All that remained were a few branches in Inyu's hand, ashes, and a clearly terrified Chunin. Inyu, report to debrief room 3 with the witness. Nico, take over Inyu's shift. Everyone else is dismissed. The group gradually dispersed. The Hokage lingered for a few more moments, feeling out the chakra, a very familiar signature that had permeated the area thoroughly and heavily. This is quite disturbing. There were 2 girls in the Konoha village who couldn't sleep. They were terrified, nothing in the vicinity or even about themselves. They were terrified of how they felt. Neither of them could explain it, but it was awful. They were familiar with those feelings. Hinata shivered as she remembered the few seconds of despair she had experienced. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The agony and terror what had occurred. She wished her family wasn't so controlling. There was no way for her to find out. It was only now that things had returned to normal. One of the strongest emotions was comfort, and the other was pain. She knew only a few others could feel it, but it appeared that her entire family had felt the terrible pain from earlier. She might have been able to sneak out to find out what happened and if the twins were okay if it hadn't been so obvious. But she couldn't, and she despised it. The other girl had a different reason for being awake. Her intuition was telling her that something had happened. That sensation, those emotions, were all too familiar, and when they appeared while she was walking towards her apartment, she dashed towards them. Narumi had no idea how she knew, but she did know where to go. But it vanished as soon as she thought it was right next to her. The little girl walked around the area for a few minutes, frustrated. It was close by, and she knew it, so how come she couldn't find it? Narumi never noticed her guard following her towards it, that he briefly abandoned her once she was close enough, that her guard was quickly replaced by another, and that she walked past a bundle of ashes in her search. She never discovered anything, but what the blue-eyed girl was feeling made her sick, and she had no idea why. Narumi finally trudged home, frustrated.
So this was it for today. I will continue this story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.